the reason why I'm getting kind of pumped up about this right now is because there are a bunch of people that have been attacking Jordan Peterson from the Christian camp. And I understand the criticism against Jordan Peterson. I have said in many videos that there are plenty of things that we can say to criticize Jordan Peterson. In fact, I finished reading Vox Day's book, and I believe that I could write a much better criticism of Jordan Peterson, which would be much more accurate and also would cut in the right places instead of strange conspiracy occult directions.
This is Jordan Peterson's pal, Jonathan Pajot, saying that Vox Day's claims about Peterson being an occultist are preposterous. In Vox Day's book, Jordanetics, A Journey into the Mind of Humanity's Greatest Thinker, he argues that Peterson is a mentally ill occultist, possibly a schizophrenic, who channels the writings of Aleister Crowley and sometimes employs speech that's resonant of Adolf Hitler. Naturally, Jordanetics was ignored by the media and Peterson's liberal critics, because Day was a far-right figure who, for the most part, supported his claims with evidence and reason in an attempt to out a dangerous lunatic heading a cult comprised of other dangerous lunatics. But reading Vox Day would have meant platforming him, at least in the minds of progressives, so no progress was made, and nearly all assessments of Peterson since Jordanetics have been irrelevant. Jordanetics has some serious flaws, and I'm no admirer of Vox Day, but as I detail in The Devil and His Due, Peterson really is a mentally ill occultist who has been diagnosed with schizophrenia. He not only channels Aleister Crowley, he plagiarizes him, and has done so over 600 times. He does indeed sound like Adolf Hitler, whose speech he also imitates, and without question he is dangerously crazy, and so are his followers. His cult is a Hitlerite and satanic death cult, and how anyone could think that his movement had anything to do with life advice, let alone rescuing lost men from the clutches of the far right, or understanding the motivations of Nazi camp guards in order to prevent another Holocaust, as Peterson claims, not that anyone is even aware of these claims, is beyond comprehension. I also argue in The Devil and His Due that Peterson filches from another Satanist named Anton LaVey, who I guessed Peterson had read after unearthing his reams of Crowley copying, evident across his first 3 books, but especially heavy in maps of meaning. When Peterson talks about mythology, religion, alchemy, and symbolism, he's usually summoning language and imagery from the occult. In a recent video called Satanism, Fear, Manipulation, and Suffering, Peterson interviewed Anton LaVey's daughter and admitted that he'd read and enjoyed her father's work. Even better, he admitted that he'd read and enjoyed Aleister Crowley's work. In another recent interview, he quoted Aleister Crowley's mantra, "Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law." What Crowley meant was that you should free yourself from the shackles of biblical morality, that is, Jewish morality, and do evil. Discard the 10 Commandments and follow Crowley's sole commandment. Turn Judeo-Christian society on its head, help the Egyptian falcon god Horus, a clandestine symbol for Satan, destroy the old eon, dominated by Christ, and usher in the new eon, to be ruled by the Antichrist. The new eon, Crowley explained, would begin with a huge and ruthless war. To my knowledge, before now, Peterson has never publicly mentioned the names Aleister Crowley or Anton LaVey, nor has he conceded to having an interest in Satanism. True, he has written and spoken about what he learned from the occult, using language that I traced back to Aleister Crowley, but he never specified whose occultic writings he was referring to. Anyway, I wonder what good old Jonathan Pajot would think of Peterson saying he'd read and appreciated the works of Aleister Crowley.
We can't just look at at an image and simply because it looks strange to somehow say that it's evil just because of that. Now, I'm not defending, for example, occult practices. Somehow someone, for example, like Aleister Crowley, was an obviously evil person.
He certainly was. And to get a sense of just how committed Crowley was to the cause, he would abuse and brutalize anyone stupid enough to get too close to him, and is believed to be responsible for several deaths, including that of his own daughter, as well as a woman he drove to suicide. I recommend reading The Devil and His Due, or a biography called Do What Thou Wilt, A Life of Aleister Crowley by Lawrence Sutton. But now, let's watch Peterson dispensing more life advice in order to rescue men with fascist tendencies from joining some kind of crazy far-right cult by interviewing the daughter of Anton LaVey, founder of the Church of Satan.
everybody. Today I'm speaking with Zina Schreck, whose original name was LaVey, and who is the daughter of Anton LaVey, who was the most famous Satanist of the last half of the 20th century. And so she grew up with the man who established the modern Church of Satan.
He probably says LaVey was the most famous Satanist of the last half of the 20th century, in silent reverence to the most famous Satanist of the first half of that century, Aleister Crowley.
A very intelligent man, very charismatic, very creative, very Machiavellian, psychopathic, manipulative, a Carney Barker, an admirer of P.T. Barnum, a man for whom there was a sucker born every minute, a man who deeply believed that the world was an act and that life was a carnival, and that if you had the wool pulled over your eyes to his benefit, then so much the worse for you, and I suppose as well you deserve it for being so foolish and gullible. That's the eternal self-justification of the Carney Barker psychopath.
When Peterson calls someone a psychopath, it's meant as a compliment. He tends to associate psychopaths with intelligence, charisma, and creativity. For example, he has said that Hitler was not stupid, charismatic, and a competent artist. Moreover, Peterson seethes with rage when he characterizes Justin Trudeau, but Anton LaVey, he tells us calmly, was smart, compelling, and creative. Finally, when describing LaVey, JP was simultaneously describing himself. Peterson is not a self-help guru, but if you're too foolish to see that, well, too bad for you. The objective of Satanists, who are narcissists, is to deceive. Perhaps it could be said that narcissists lie like the devil.
And Zina grew up in that household as, by all appearances, a dutiful woman, young woman, committed to the well-being of her father, to the degree where in the 1980s, when a panic about satanic practice arose in the general population, quite a widespread panic, she felt compelled to defend him, and took on the mantle of high priestess of the Satanic Church for 5 years before coming to the realization that she had been immersed in a pack of lies, in a web of lies, before understanding as a consequence of the promptings of her conscience that she was participating in something that was not what it claimed to be, and in a life that wasn't what she thought it was, and was also called by promptings, you might say, of a genuinely religious nature to forswear the church, to leave her father, and to set out, what would you say, into the desert of her own doubt. And so that's what we talk about. The crazy 1970s, the hangover from the hedonistic bliss of the summer of love hippies, the dark side of let it all hang out and tune in, turn on, and drop out, right? The catastrophic underbelly of immature hedonism, right? And, well, who better to guide us through that absolute bloody catastrophic mess than the daughter of the prime Satanist from the 1960s and the 1970s? Join us. Zina, thank you very much for agreeing to talk with me and everyone today.
Satanism doesn't have anything to do with Peterson's stated aims, but then almost nothing Peterson talks about does. We can therefore speculate that his stated aims are just a cover story for his real aims. Occultism is all about hiding your true intentions. Also, note how Peterson's chronology of Satanism indicates that he's made a study of the subject. In the 60s and 70s, the movement was dominated by LaVey's church. In the 80s, there was a backlash and widespread panic about satanic cults. And when he later concedes to having read Crowley, this suggests that he's got the 20th century satanic timeline covered. Additionally, he has read and recommended Milton's Paradise Lost, about Satan, Goethe's Faust, starring Mephistopheles, Dante's Inferno, Dostoevsky's Brothers Karamazov, which mentions the devil over 100 times, Dostoevsky's Demons, sometimes called the Devils or the Possessed, James Joyce's Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man, because of its meticulous description of hell, and Nietzsche's The Antichrist. He has also read and recommended Demonic Males, Apes and the Origins of Human Violence by Dale Peterson and Richard Wrangham, The Origin of Satan, How Christians Demonize Jews, Pagans, and Heretics by Elaine Pagels, Shake Hands with the Devil, The Future of Humanity in Rwanda by Romeo Dallaire, about genocide and satanic possession, Satan's Silence, Ritual Abuse and the Making of a Modern American Witch Hunt by Debbie Nathan and Michael Snedeker, about adults who imbued children with false memories of sexual abuse, which caused hysteria among parents who believed educators were Satanists. I See Satan Fall Like Lightning by René Girard, Mephistopheles, The Devil in the Modern World by Jeffrey Burton Russell, and The Devil, Perceptions of Evil from Antiquity to Primitive Christianity, also by Russell, which Peterson enjoyed because it dwelt on the embodiment of the ideas of evil. Peterson is an educator, but I've never heard him recommend a book about education. Given his devilish reading list, and that he writes about the Dark Lord in his first 3 books some 165 times, occasionally in flattering and even poetic terms, it would stand to reason that he would also read books by Satanists. To speculate in this way is not fantastical, but rational.
Your father was a very famous man, an extraordinarily controversial person. You know, I was reading the Satanic Rituals this morning, and back, you know, I'm old enough, so I kind of caught the tail end of the hedonistic 60s. You know, I'm really a kid of the 70s, and the 70s was where the 60s went to die. So, and
I always say that the 70s are the hangover of the 60s.
yeah, that's exactly right. The drunken hangover.
It was a really ugly hangover.
Yeah, that's for sure. That's for sure. It really was. And, you know, when I was 18 or 19, I spent a fair bit of time investigating Aleister Crowley and also your father's works and familiarizing myself with the dark side of the 1960s, you know, looking at how that had affected the music, for example, of the Rolling Stones and the vicious underbelly of the, what would you say, carefree hedonism, let it all hang out, tune in, turn on, drop out ethos of the 1960s. It's like, that's all fine, boys and girls, but, you know, there's a pretty dark shadow that comes along with that. And it's like the shadow of the Marquis de Sade for the French Enlightenment. And these aren't the sorts of things that people like to delve into, except carelessly and foolishly, that's for sure, and pridefully. And, you know, it was quite a trip down memory lane in some ways to take a look at this book today, because I haven't thought about those things in relationship to the early 60s or the early 70s and the late 60s for quite a long time.
Reading a trashy occultic paperback written by a Satanist was a trip down memory lane for JP, because when he was 18 or 19, he spent a fair bit of time investigating, strictly for scientific purposes mind, the works of Anton LaVey and Aleister Crowley. Why, I am shocked. This is what I said in The Devil and His Due. How did I know? A little critical thinking and a lot of linguistic analysis. I also devised theories about where he got his occultic books, because they would have been hard to find in a town like Fairview, Alberta. One theory was that he got most of them in the big city, Edmonton, after fleeing there when he was 17 or 18, his accounts vary, to get away from his harsh and mentally ill father. His words, not mine. He'd obviously read Crowley before he began writing Maps of Meaning at the age of 22 or 23, so one of my hunches was that he'd done so between the ages of 17 and 22 in Edmonton, which Peterson just confirmed. At Harvard, he claimed that his Maps of Meaning course was about uncovering what motivated the Nazis to try and exterminate the Jews. But apart from saying that the Nazis brutalized their enemies because they liked it, he never broached the subject of Nazi motivation. Instead, he ladled out praise for Hitler, for example by calling him courageous and charismatic, and noting how remarkable it was that he'd reached the top of the hierarchy after a life of obscurity. He also suggested that the best group to be a member of was a neo-Nazi group, and that Nazi higher-ups shouldn't have been tried as war criminals at Nuremberg because when they argued that they were just following orders, this was a quote-unquote valid statement. And naturally, he went on and on about Taoism, Buddhism, Christianity, Egyptology, Sumerian mythology, and the gods Marduk, Tiamat, Osiris, and Horus, while summoning oodles of arcane trivia, most of which he swiped from Aleister Crowley. To cite just one example, Crowley commissioned a set of tarot cards based on what are known as the Rider-Waite tarot cards. He explained that his death card was symbolized by the scorpion, which was supposed by early observers of nature to commit suicide when finding itself ringed with fire or otherwise in a desperate situation. And during one of Peterson's Maps lectures, he said, "A North African tribe called the Marabouts take a scorpion and put it in the sand and draw a big circle around it, and the scorpion attempts to escape, but comes up to the groove in the sand and just runs around the circle. It won't cross the border, so then the Marabout takes the circle and divides it in half, and the scorpion zips around inside the half circle, and then the Marabout divides the circle into quarters, and the scorpion is getting more and more frantic and confined. Finally, the scorpion can't move and stings itself to death." As it happens, scorpions are immune to their own venom, and marabouts are not members of a North African tribe, but sub-Saharan practitioners of black magic. Funny how Crowley and Peterson spoke about suicidal scorpions trapped within a ring or circle, especially in light of Peterson having spent a fair bit of time investigating Crowley's works. In Beyond Order, Peterson includes an image of a tarot card that he says was adapted from the Rider-Waite tarot cards. The Waite, in Rider-Waite, was Arthur Edward Waite, a black magician and devil worshipper who was an associate of Aleister Crowley in an organization known as the Golden Dawn. Crowley wrote about Waite disparagingly 5 times. In 12 Rules for Life, Peterson mentions the guitarist for Led Zeppelin, Jimmy Page, who was an adherent of Aleister Crowley and bought his former home in the Scottish Highlands. The album, Led Zeppelin III, was engraved with a truncated version of Crowley's mantra, "Do what thou wilt." Also in 12 Rules, Peterson includes the poem The Second Coming by Y.B. Yeats, which is about the return of Lucifer and contains a reference to a rough beast that's slouching toward Bethlehem, which is certainly a reference to the devil, but may also signify Crowley, who branded himself the Great Beast. By Yeats's own admission, he was an occultist first and a poet second. He was also a member of the Golden Dawn, the organization that Crowley belonged to before forming his own religion. Yeats and Crowley were colleagues, and Crowley referred to Yeats as a literary light and a disheveled demonologist. Again in 12 Rules, Peterson invokes the Austrian doctor and psychotherapist Alfred Adler on the subject of lying, and Crowley, who wrote The Book of Lies, met with Adler several times. He gave him a copy of his book, Magic, wherein he boasts about harassing the woman I mentioned earlier so badly that she shot herself through the heart. Crowley recorded his impression of Adler, saying, "He really is a great man on Argentium Astrum lines," meaning that Adler was into the sort of mysticism that Crowley wrote about in his most popular work, The Book of the Law. In public appearances, Peterson has bragged about how at Harvard he used to have Timothy Leary's old job, which isn't true, although Leary did teach at Harvard and believed he was guided by Satan.
Yeah, well, there's no Timothy Leary guy that's telling everybody to tune in, turn out, and drop out.
I had his old position at Harvard.
Yeah? No kidding.
Yeah. No kidding. Isn't that something, eh?
That's pretty wild.
Yeah, that's for sure. I knew people there that knew him. Yeah, it was really something, I thought. He taught personality at Harvard. He had the same position as me.
Care to guess who Timothy Leary was an adherent of?
Well, I've been an admirer of Aleister Crowley. I think that I'm carrying on much of the work that he started over 100 years ago, and I think the 60s themselves. You know, Crowley said he was in favor of finding your own self and do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law.
So you might say, let's say that Sartre says, "Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law." That was actually Aleister Crowley, right? Okay,
Yeah.
So but that's a good statement of this self-centeredness.
It's not a command to do evil, it's a good statement. And of course, Crowley wasn't a monster whose mission was to use his writing to enlist cult members, who he would then manipulate, abuse, and destroy. No, he was an honest Satanist, a humanitarian, hence why he wrote, "The devil is my natural master," and "I don't give a damn for the whole human race. You're nothing but a pack of cards." Perhaps Peterson had these quotes in mind when he casually said that Crowley was self-centered. When I first figured out that Jordan Peterson was plagiarizing Aleister Crowley, I was stunned. Before then, I had no idea what Crowley even looked like, and knew precious little about occultism or Satanism. I had already worked out that Peterson was copying from Hitler, also a shock, but wondered why he would copy from Crowley. Apart from both men being evil, I didn't understand the connection. I then read 10 of Crowley's books, but found just one fleeting reference to Nazism, a mention of Das Dritte Reich. It wasn't until I read the biographies Do What Thou Wilt by Lawrence Sutton and Aleister Crowley, The Beast in Berlin, Art, Sex and Magic in the Weimar Republic by Tobias Churton that I began to connect the dots. Crowley hated his native Great Britain and loved Germany and its intellectuals, including Goethe, Freud, Jung, and especially Nietzsche, who made anti-Semitic remarks, advocated for the end of democracy and oppressive Christian morality, and believed that we Europeans should transform into die Übermenschen and do evil. Nietzsche equated this Übermensch with Satan, and Crowley likely borrowed the concept when selecting Horus as a stand-in for Satan. Crowley published propaganda on behalf of Germany in World War I and said, "I have always considered Hitler a prophet," prior to World War II. Between 1930 and 1932, Crowley lived in Berlin, where he was heartened by the popularity of mysticism and told people that he urged the Nazis to use the swastika as their symbol. Indeed, Crowley grew so enamored with Nazism that he sent the Führer a copy of the Book of the Law in the hopes that his religion could serve as the philosophical basis for Nazi principles and the base for a new Nazi order. However, there's no evidence that the book, which outlines the new eon and contains the dictum, "Do what thou wilt," ever got through. Crowley wagered that the Third Reich could help topple the old eon and erect the new eon, and that with Jesus the Jew out of the way, Europeans could finally become their own gods, Horus could rule, and Satan could be unchained. Crowley was a hopeless anti-Semite whose new eon would have been an appropriate philosophical template for the Third Reich, and members of the Nazi brass were already primed to accept Crowley's occultic mumbo-jumbo because they'd steeped themselves in everything from Satanism to theosophy. It's not a myth, but a much overlooked factor in understanding who the Nazis were and why they had such mass appeal. Fascism requires mysticism and irrational beliefs. To be certain, after World War II, there arose an underground movement which produced numerous texts on what is known as esoteric Nazism, a blending of occultism and Hitlerism which helped fuel white nationalism and neo-Nazism. I am confident that Peterson has familiarized himself with such texts, some of which tout Crowley's new eon, which, as mentioned, he wrote about in the Book of the Law. Crowley composed the Book of the Law in Cairo in 3 days via automatic writing after being possessed by Satan, or so he said. Horus became his religious godhead and his alter ego. Crowley was Horus. Crowley was the devil. In this photo, you can see him wearing his conical hat, which features the all-seeing eye of Horus within a pyramid. Here's one where he's wearing a cape with a cross, and here's another where he's about to release a dove. Now, here's Peterson at a TEDx talk he called Redefining Reality. Again, ask yourself what that topic has to do with his stated aims, showing an image of someone who looks like Crowley along with the Eye of Providence. Note the cross, the dove, and the pyramid/conical hat. JP never explained why he showed these images, but then he never does. He has shown paintings from William Blake, never revealing who the artist was or that Blake was an occultist. He has read a passage from Carl Jung's occultic Red Book without revealing the source or that the text was about the devil. He has touted a book called The Discovery of the Unconscious by Henri Ellenberger while failing to mention that it discusses occultic practices like automatic writing and experiences of satanic possession that are the result of schizophrenic delusion. Without question, satanic possession is one of Peterson's favorite topics, and he's forever telling his marks that they're possessed by a spirit. Peterson depicts Lucifer as a spirit in his books 11 times. In Maps, he says that Lucifer is the spirit of unbridled rationality. Here's an image of Crowley, which features the all-seeing eye of Horus. And here's a picture of Peterson from Redefining Reality, showing an image of the all-seeing eye and a statuette of Horus. Keeping in mind who Horus represents in the Crowley books Peterson read, in 12 Rules he recounts an eerie vision he had where he was Horus flying over pyramids. But then, Peterson loves Horus so much that he has an image of the all-seeing eye in his home office. And now, here are some examples of Peterson plagiarizing Crowley. Crowley, do what thou wilt. Peterson, quoting the Bible, be it unto thee, even as thou wilt. With the understanding that Crowley adored Milton's Paradise Lost, Rule 5 in Beyond Order is prefaced by a picture of Satan plunging into hell after being expelled from heaven. Interestingly, Satan looks a lot like Peterson during his Harvard days, and the rule is, do not do what you hate. Crowley, do what thou wilt. Peterson, do not do what you hate. Crowley, Milton was a great poet. Peterson, Milton's great poem was a prophecy. Crowley, Paradise Lost allowed me to gloat over the figures of Satan and sin. Peterson, the great figure of evil, the figure of Satan. Crowley, the theory, roughly speaking, is that of Milton or Dante. Peterson, I read and perhaps even understood much of Milton's Paradise Lost, Goethe's Faust, and Dante's Inferno. Crowley, quoting Milton, evil, be thou my good. Peterson, quoting Milton, evil, be thou my good. Crowley, fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Peterson, fear of God is the beginning of wisdom. Here, the Lord, or God, is not Christian, but an allusion to Satan. Satanists invert biblical language to create a rudimentary code that only initiates can decode. Crowley, thus the devil is said to be able to disguise himself as an angel of light. Peterson, Lucifer is God's most wondrous angel, Lucifer, the light bearer. Crowley, the Satanistic idea of working evil for its own sake. Peterson, man chooses evil for the sake of evil. Crowley, infliction of pain for its own sake. Peterson, pain can be inflicted for the sake of that pain. Crowley, every man for himself and the devil take the hindmost. Peterson, every man for himself and the devil take the hindmost. Crowley, to beard the turkey in his den. Peterson, to beard the lion in its den. Crowley, Apollo, the sun god. Apollo as the god of the sun and male beauty. Peterson, light is Apollo, the sun king, god of enlightenment. Crowley, the great mother of fertility, Diana of the Ephesians, many-breasted. Peterson, the many-breasted Greco-Roman goddess Diana, mistress of the animals. Crowley, the word Pan is then explained, P, the letter of Mars. Peterson, Pan is the god of fear, right? Mars is the god of rage. Crowley, the awakening of Kundalini. The serpent is also the Kundalini serpent, the magical force itself. Peterson, the goal of Kundalini Yoga is to awaken this serpent and to thereby reach enlightenment. Crowley, in the Adept, the awakened Kundalini takes her pleasure with the Lord of all, Kundalini force being driven up the spine. Peterson, the snake is regarded as the regulator of conscious intensity by the adepts of Kundalini Yoga. This snake is a creature of the spine. Crowley, the Tohu Bohu. Peterson, Tohu Vabohu. Crowley, magical phenomena were of constant occurrence. Peterson, magical novel occurrence. Crowley, sympathetic magic, by means of sympathetic magic. Peterson, Eliade describes the sympathetic magic. Crowley, the magical virtues of silence, the four magical virtues. Peterson, quoting Eliade, the magical virtues. Eliade is Mircea Eliade, who was a Romanian academic, occultist, and Nazi sympathizer. Crowley, the word abracadabra is familiar to everyone. I adopted this word to conduct all major magical operations. Peterson, this is true in particular of the word, the magic word, abracadabra. Crowley, to make actual magical contact with the spiritual energy of the sun. Peterson, the certainty of magical success in following the path of the sun. Crowley, sin against the Holy Ghost. Peterson, sin against the Holy Ghost. Crowley, he met a violent death. Peterson, he met a violent death. Crowley, to torture and kill. Peterson, to torture and kill. Crowley, an experience of horror and pain. Peterson, we experience the horror and pain. Crowley, the spilling of the blood. Peterson, the spilling of the blood. Crowley, the flowing of blood from a wound. Peterson, the blood that welled from a great wound. Crowley, a personal power of cruelty, delighting in murder, rape. Peterson, the lust for blood, rape, and destruction is very much part of power's attraction. Crowley, he showed how children were cast into the fire or offered up in sacrifices on bloody altars. Peterson, human sacrifice, including that of children. Crowley, I made a circle and built an altar of stones. Peterson, to make sacrifices to God on altars of stone. Crowley, to convert the whole place, as it stood, into an impregnable magic circle. Peterson, we've just drawn a magic circle around ourselves. Crowley, transmuted as by heavenly alchemy, the most critical of all operations of magic and of alchemy. Peterson, the transmutation of metals into gold, attested to already in Chinese alchemy. Crowley, the alchemical symbol of sulfur. Sulfur is the male fiery energy of the universe. Peterson, the alchemical sulfur is closely connected with the devil. Crowley, the three active principles, sulfur, mercury, and salt. Peterson, for one alchemist, it was salt, sulfur, vinegar. Crowley, quartz, the perfumes and sandals, the altar, rock crystal. Peterson, quoting Eliade, magical substances, quartz crystals. Crowley, the Nile is the home of Sebek the crocodile, who threatens Harpocrates, the child version of Horus. Peterson, I suspect that a lot of our ancestors met a nasty death at the hands of Nile crocodiles. Here's a picture of Crowley on the left, dressed like Harpocrates, or the child version of Horus, and Peterson on the right, dressed like Crowley. Peterson purchased his cape in Portugal shortly after investigating Crowley's works. Crowley, in the beginning was the Word, the Logos, who is to be identified with Christ. Peterson, the Spirit of Christ, the world-engendering Logos. Crowley, Horus in the west took the throne of Osiris in the east. Peterson, Horus's well-deserved ascension to the throne. Crowley, in the king's chamber of the Great Pyramid. Peterson, hidden chambers in the pyramids. Crowley, the dominant demon of the desert. Peterson, the desert encounter with the devil himself. Crowley, INRI, me crucified, me slain, interred, arisen, inspire, tarot, me glorified, anointed, fill with frenzied fire. Peterson, all nature is through fire renewed, occultist, Gnostic interpretation of the meaning of the initials traditionally depicted at the top of the cross of Christ, INRI. It's an occultist interpretation, Peterson tells us. This was Peterson imitating Crowley, who was speaking as Horus. Crowley, and I held the victory of Ra, or Horus, upon Apophis and the first of the golden dawns. Peterson, Apophis, for example, the Egyptian serpent, that's the serpent that eats the sun every night. It's the serpent that Ra, or Horus, that's the sun god, kills every morning when he rises again. Crowley, the dawn of light. Peterson, the dawning of light. Here, Peterson is paying tribute to the Golden Dawn. Crowley, the resurrection of Osiris and Horus. Peterson, the religion of Osiris and Horus has now promised rebirth and resurrection. Crowley, a hieroglyph of light. Ayin means eye. Peterson, the still famous hieroglyphic Egyptian eye. Crowley, an Egyptian eye within an equilateral triangle which was surrounded by a sun blaze of rays. Peterson, the thing that's at the top of the pyramid needs to be an eye. Crowley, twin serpents, these represent the mercurial double current as on the caduceus. Peterson, the Taoist symbol is a circle enclosing two serpents. Crowley, there were two black cobras. Peterson, the ancient Egyptians represented Osiris, god of the state, and Isis, goddess of the underworld, as twin cobras. Crowley, the wand of the chief adept, crowned with the winged globe, with its twin serpents of Horus and Osiris. Peterson, the black serpent, Chaos, has a white dot on its head. The white serpent, Order, has a black dot on its head. Crowley, the mandrake is the typically phallic plant. Peterson, a mandrake root, for example, has the nature of a man because it has the shape of a man. Crowley, cross upon cross of elemental fire, life circles life, the rose, all flowers above. Peterson, quoting T.S. Eliot, into the crown knot of fire, and the fire and the rose are one. Here, Peterson is honoring Rosicrucianism, which inspired Crowley. Also, T.S. Eliot was well versed in the occult. Crowley, they are fed with the lucent water from a lotus floating upon the sea, which rises. Peterson, meaning is the lotus, striving upward through the dark lake depths, through the ever-clearing water. Crowley, upward and downward triangles, the doctrine of Shiva and Shakti. Peterson, the downward triangle symbolizes Shakti, the feminine, the upward triangle, Shiva, the masculine. Crowley, the only man worthy of our notice is Fraser of the Golden Bough. Peterson, quoting Northrop Frye, the hypothetical ritual studied in Fraser's Golden Bough. Crowley, the general solution is to represent the Savior as the Fool. Peterson, the Fool as the archetypal precursor to the figure of the equally archetypal Redeemer. Speaking of fools, here's Crowley describing his tarot card, the Fool, which can be seen in this image. Crowley, the Fool of the Tarot. The scholiasts say that the picture is that of a gay, careless youth with a sack full of follies and illusions dancing along the edge of a precipice. And here's Peterson describing the image of the Fool which prefaces Rule 1 in Beyond Order, as can be seen in this image. Peterson, the Fool in the tarot card is a young, handsome man, eyes lifted upward, journeying into the mountains, sun shining brightly upon him, about to carelessly step over a cliff. Here are three versions of the Fool, from left to right, the one co-attributed to the Satanist Arthur Waite, who Peterson credited, one from the Satanist Aleister Crowley, who borrowed from the Rider-Waite deck and was an associate of Waite, and one from the self-help guru Jordan Peterson. Please examine the Rider-Waite card. Can you spot the butterfly? No? Good, because it isn't there. However, it's in Crowley's card as well as Peterson's, and that's because Peterson copied it from Crowley. Oh, did I mention that JP has his own set of tarot cards? He calls them premium playing cards, but what playing cards have pictures of the devil and imagery lifted from the occult? Here's some official JP advertising, probably created at his request. Note all the symbols around his Maps logo. If they look occultic, they should. Again, he just took them from occultic symbols like the ones in this image. In the following, you will hear Crowley describing a winged egg, which comes from Freemasonry. Here's the image that probably inspired him, although it would have been adapted by other occultists. Crowley, at the bottom of the hole is the winged Orphic egg. This egg represents the essence of all that life which comes under this formula of male and female. The egg is gray, mingling white and black, thus it signifies the cooperation of the three supernals of the tree of life. The color of the serpent is purple, Mercury in the scale of the queen. And now here's Peterson describing this image, which prefaces Rule 2 in Beyond Order. Note the compasses and squares, allusions to Freemasonry. Peterson, at the very base of the image is a winged sphere. Atop that perches a dragon. Standing on the dragon is a two-headed human figure, one head male, the other female. The male head is associated with the image of the sun, the female with the moon. In between is the symbol for Mercury. Crowley, the tree of life, which is a map of the universe. Peterson, the tree of life, which serves as the very foundation of the cosmos. The tree of life in Genesis doesn't represent the cosmos. Peterson is imitating Crowley, writing about the Kabbalistic tree of life, which he does over 100 times. Crowley, Blake was right in saying, "The lust of the goat is the glory of God." Peterson, quoting Blake, "The lust of the goat is the bounty of God." Crowley, "I had penetrated into the temple and sacrificed a goat. I went to Caligat and sacrificed a goat. It was desirable to massacre a goat upon the altar, to invoke the spirit of a demon into the goat, and slaying the animal at that moment of possession. Peterson, like, you don't know how serious you would take a vow if you sacrificed a goat in your backyard. You know, it's actually a very dramatic thing to do. But to take the life of something and spill its blood, that's something you remember, especially if you haven't done it before. That was Peterson urging his followers to perform a satanic ritual. Remember, the name of the LaVey book that he was reading was The Satanic Rituals. And speaking of LaVey, kindly compare the following. LaVey, Satan's art and works brought men to the rack and thumbscrew. The morning stars have dust between their spikes, and the Iron Maiden is cold and yearning for a lover to embrace. Peterson, only man could conceive of the rack, the Iron Maiden, and the thumbscrew. Only man will inflict suffering for the sake of suffering. That is the best definition of evil I have been able to formulate. Wikipedia lists over 60 instruments of torture. What are the chances that LaVey and Peterson would list the same 3 embedded in a conversation about evil? Crowley, Visita interiora terrae rectificando invenis occultum lapidum. Visit the interior parts of the earth. By rectification, thou shalt find the hidden stone. The initials make the word vitriol. Peterson, the term vitriol underscores the implacable necessity of the descensus ad inferos. Visita interiora terrae rectificando invenis occultum lapidum. Visit the interior of the earth, and by purification you will find the secret stone. People find it incomprehensible that someone could worship Satan, but there is a kind of logic to it. If some people believe there's a good God, it stands to reason that others would believe there's an evil God, and if such people had experienced trauma or suffered from mental illness, for example, Crowley, Hitler, and Peterson, then evil, for example, a school shooting or children getting cancer, might be seen as an opportunity to rejoice. Finally, someone is getting a taste of the pain that I experience every day. This is the primary wish of the narcissist, whose mission is to participate in the harming of others because someone or something harmed them. Of course, people who gravitate towards Satanism are almost certainly mentally unwell. Behind the veneer of the fierce and confident-looking Aleister Crowley was a broken, grown-up adolescent who'd been severely beaten as a child and impaired by schizophrenia and its psychosis. Crowley believed he could make himself invisible, an example of the sort of magical thinking that can accompany schizophrenia. He also believed he was possessed by, could communicate with, and was Satan, classic schizophrenic delusions. In Maps, Peterson tells us how in his early 20s he experienced a psychological split and no longer knew who he was or what was real. He felt agitated and confused and began hearing a voice that chastised him whenever he spoke. The voice came with eyes that watched and judged him constantly. The all-seeing eyes, as it were. In late 2019, Peterson's wife and daughter checked him into a Toronto hospital after he became withdrawn, wouldn't talk to his son, had a break with reality, became obsessed with destruction, and was threatening to harm himself. Physicians diagnosed him with schizophrenia, and indeed, his story is almost identical to accounts from other schizophrenics. Jordan Peterson is a plaything of schizophrenia, a psychopathic chatterbox who's shuttled about by what he probably perceives as mystical forces. I mean, really, he talks about how meaning shines forth to him, and how he's always chasing this shiny meaning like it's the snitch in the game of Quidditch. He is profoundly mentally ill, and it's his illness which compels him to rail against the Marx-loving authoritarian wokeflakes and tell his idiotic followers that Hitler was a genius. He read Crowley between the ages of 18 and 19, and he's still 18 or 19. He suffers from arrested development and thinks Satanism is cool, like a 14-year-old boy thinks Dungeons and Dragons is cool. To be sure, the pictures of knights, castles, and dragons in Maps of Meaning look like they were taken from a D&D manual. On top of schizophrenia, Peterson suffers from narcissism, the lying, grandiosity, verbal abuse, he's always telling his fans they're stupid and useless, and gaslighting, everyone he dislikes is psychopathic and satanic, should have served as clues. Narcissists are renowned for plagiarism, and in the next clip, Peterson will drop hints about being a plagiarist.
when I wrote my first book, which was Maps of Meaning, I wrote every day for 3 hours for 15 years. And I vowed when I started that I was going to make that, what would you say, the highest duty that I had. Nothing was going to come before that. And there's a certain amount of cruelty in that, because it meant that, if my wife came into my office, then I would bark at her. And if my kids came into my office, like a junkyard dog surrounded by barbed wire. It's like, because you can always not write. It's not that important that day. And there might be more pressing concerns, and they're probably, including people who would just like to have something to do with you for a while, or do something nice, or have a problem fixed. It's like, no, go away. I've got 3 hours. And so I was a thief, and I took that from my life.
He was a thief, all right. He plundered the writings of Aleister Crowley, Adolf Hitler, and many others. Now watch as he explains what Maps is supposedly about.
And so I spent a very long time writing and thinking about the hardest problem that I could conceptualize, and that was the relationship between the individual and the atrocity committed in the service of totalitarian possession.
He left out that he was focused on understanding Nazi atrocities, but his cover story changes depending on the audience. Anyway, if his main aim was understanding why people in totalitarian states commit atrocities, then why all the gory and esoteric language? Why all the talk of blood, serpents, murder, Horus, the devil, sulfur, and quartz crystals? Why does he write in Maps about a painting he did of a cobra strangling Christ on the cross? And why did he tell Dave Rubin in Norway that this painting was the upshot of a schizophrenic nightmare? Why did he write in Maps about a dream he had about his grandmother's pubic hair, or how he had the unfailing urge to stab his university classmates in the back of the neck with his pen? And if Maps is about atrocity, why does the word atrocity appear in that book just 2 times? Why does the word occult appear 5 times, magic and magical 29 times, demon and demons 63 times, Satan, Lucifer, and the devil 83 times, snake and serpent 112 times, dragon 113 times, and alchemy, alchemical, and alchemist a whopping 241 times? Also, if the writing process was so serious that his wife and kids couldn't bother the author, why does Maps contain this goofy and cartoonish picture? And how come there's a cartoon called The Adventures of Fat Freddy's Cat? Finally, Peterson has said that 12 Rules for Life was a simplified and updated version of Maps of Meaning. If that's so, why does it contain the following? I've always thought that if people really noticed what I was teaching, there would be hell to pay. The Canadian media calls Peterson controversial, but really, he's certifiable. Finally, let's watch as the self-help guru expresses empathy for and compares himself to the man Crowley always considered a prophet, before hinting once again that he's a plagiarist.
So I spent a lot of time trying to understand Adolf Hitler psychologically. And in some sense, I would say, trying to develop some sympathy for him insofar as that was possible. And I think you develop sympathy for people by putting yourself in their position. And that's very difficult to do with someone like Adolf Hitler. First of all, it's very unpleasant to do that, but it's also very challenging because at minimum, he had a very complex life. But you imagine if 20 million of your countrymen are telling you that you're the savior of their country, who are you to disagree?
Peterson never puts himself in the position of the Jews, nor has he ever expressed empathy for any of Hitler's victims, including Canadian soldiers. Indeed, he only expresses empathy for himself, his family, and a long list of mentally ill, violent, and homicidal men, including Hitler. And so you wonder why someone like Hitler could have his ego blown up to the proportions that it became blown up to, and the answer is, well, do you really think that you'd be able to resist the positive blandishments of so many people? Because that in itself could easily be a form of egotism, right? I don't care what people think. It's like, well, yeah, you probably do, and you probably should. And then the question is, well, how do you keep yourself straight when you are the target of positive adulation? When we receive praise, how do we stop ourselves from exterminating millions of innocent people? something we all have to think about. Now he's going to talk about how he receives praise.
Right? Because so one of the things that happens to me quite often is that people tell me how helpful my work has been. And I think, to the degree that I can think this, I think, well, it's not surprising that it's been helpful, in large part because it's not exactly my work.
Really? And whose work is it then?
A lot of the things I've learned, and perhaps the vast majority, no doubt the vast majority of the things that I've learned because I've studied great thinkers, who in turn had studied great thinkers. And so I've been able to derive a certain amount of wisdom, and I'm able to communicate that, but I'm doing my best to ensure that I separate myself from that wisdom. And that's a hard thing to do because, of course, here I am as a person as well. And the ideas that are being transmitted through me are focused on me at that moment for that reason.
Ah, ideas are just being transmitted through him by great thinkers like Aleister Crowley and Anton LaVey, but their ideas are not his ideas. He's merely a conduit. If you would like to learn more about how Peterson channels and advocates for occultism and Satanism, please watch my video, Jordan Peterson, Cut the Goat's Throat. If you enjoyed this video, kindly hit like and subscribe, and please share. Anything you want to say, Jonathan Pageau?
And so I just want to say to a lot of those people that have been attacking Jordan Peterson, you're doing yourself a disservice, especially those of you that are traditionally Christian.
My name is Troy Parfitt. I'm not traditionally Christian, but I am the author of The Devil and His Due, How Jordan Peterson Plagiarizes Adolf Hitler. Thank you for watching, and again, I would kindly ask that you share.